On politics, like I said in my introduction much earlier, all my life I have known about one industrial action or the other, one strike action or the other by the Academic Staff Union of Nigerian universities. And in its own right, they do have reasons for this. Now, recently in its National Executive Council meeting, which held in Ibadan between the 17th and 18th of August, the Academic Staff Union of Nigerian universities have come up with a brand new set of requests, which basically they're revisiting to say the government needs to deal with and to fulfill its own part of the agreement. And part of the things which they've asked for and about is to ensure that the living standards in Nigerian universities structurally for students and the lecturers should be put in better place. They've spoken about continued port funding for universities and education in general, that according to the United Nations, it should be about 15% allocated to education. You also have the renegotiated federal government and ASSU agreement of 2009, which is still a conversation, and the big fish, which is the integrated personnel and payroll information system monster. Now, in February 2022, there was a strike action which kept students out of university from February till October. Now, they have asked that the NIMI Briggs committee agreement should be endorsed and put in place. So we'll be having this conversation. Is this a ruse by the Academic Staff Union of Nigeria? Is it the fact that the government keeps on backtracking or not signing their agreements? How does this affect the students? How does this affect the education sector and Nigerians? And having this conversation, I have with me in the studio Right Honorable Daniel Eduache Atai, who is a rights advocate and also a unionist. And virtually we have Jide Ojo, who is a public affairs analyst. So we'll start with you, Honorable Daniel. Yeah. What are your thoughts around the new communique or press release by ASSU, which we've seen lately?
Yeah, I think the situation that the Academic Staff Union of Universities found themselves in Nigeria is actually a pathetic one. They are very right for demanding 15% cut of the budget allocated to the education sector. Over time, I can say since this fourth dispensation of democracy in 1999, ASSU and the federal government have never come to terms. And you will bear witness with me that ASSU holds the power of our tertiary institutions and education. And if we do have incessant strikes in the public tertiary institutions, that means the manpower production there in terms of graduates will not be fit enough in their professional lifestyles or pursuit. That means the country is shortchanging itself because of unproductive education.
Okay.
If that matter has no continuity from one successive government to the other, is a failure of the system. What do? We understand that this current administration just came in. I think from history past, like I said, apart from 2023, there has never been any administrative dispensation that ASSU didn't go on strike. Either it is 5 months, 7 months, 36 days, 3 months. Even in 2005, they went on a straight 1-year strike, collapsing the education system completely at the public sector, public tertiary institutions. And the government has not still deemed it fit to nail it and knit it into the board. How do you do that? Mine is not just to criticize. we know that this is fundamental failure. Where is this failure coming from? Is the demand too high? 15% allocation in according to UNESCO. So, is 15% cut of the budget allocated to education sector too much for the government to implement? Okay, let's just oppose it with what the government do allocate to political parties or electoral umpire. You will see the variance. And you also know that, yes, it is a kind of jettisoning the public education system, of which this current administration of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu frowned at and reiterated that under his time, he wouldn't want ASSU to go on even a day strike. And he has given the directive to the present Minister of Education. ASSU have had closed-door meetings with him on 2 occasions. If it is not feasible, if it is the issue of the IPPIS, what do you do? And if it is issue that can no longer be solved, what is the fundamental solution that you apply? Then it boils down to the constitutional framework of our education system. Because the education system is a sector of human productivity, human learning. And if you jettison the sector that produces your manpower in a nation, it means you are jettisoning your economy completely from production, from productivity.
But I do have a question when it comes to that, because should strike action be the only recourse to getting solutions? We talk about jettisoning the sector and all. There are these students who go to universities, and instead of spending 4 years, they're spending 6 years. We've read about how recently they're trying to say you have to be 18 years before getting into university. But when you spend 6 years in a 4-year course. So, for instance, I did a PhD which should have lasted 3 years, but it took 6 years because almost 6 years, because 1 year there was COVID. In 2022, there was like an 8-month strike where students lost a whole session. And they're competing against students in private universities, which now creates a level of segregation and discrimination at some point in the recruitment market, because you're wondering why are there these differences. Isn't there the opportunity for legal recourse, like we've seen with the local government autonomy, for ASSU to take the government to court, get judicial ruling and process? Do they always need to go on strike to be able to pass this point? Is that the best solution?
Because ASSU itself is a union. That is why I said it is not constitutional. It becomes a fundamental problem in the Nigerian constitution as regard the education sector. If you look around the sectors we have in the country, I gave a comparison that if it is INEC, which is the electoral empire, for instance, will the Nigerian budget system deny them, INEC, for instance, their funding? The question is no. The answer is no. And if it is the security sector, the defense sector, which is also good in a democracy, because the protection of lives and properties is one of the constitutional rights. Will the government, the federal government, jettison the defense sector or deny them of their funding? The answer is no. So why can't you make a reform in the same constitution so that you can capture either the academic sector as a mandatory sector that should have their independent funding just the way they are demanding.
Okay, let me bring in Mr. and I'll come back to you. Let me bring in Mr. Jide Ojo, who is joining us virtually. He is a writer, publisher, journalist, and a public affairs analyst who's been on this show repeatedly. Good morning, sir, and welcome to the weekend show.
It's my pleasure. Good morning.
Always a pleasure having you on. ASSU, ASSU, ASSU. Daniel in the studio just said every administration has had some ASSU strike at one level or the other. The only time we haven't had is in recent time between 2023 and now. But ASSU is now proposing another strike action. And it's quite unfortunate that it's been for the same reasons. The reasons haven't changed since 2008 to 2012. The agreements which they reached last year, where they blamed the labor minister for making sure that didn't come in, see the day of light. Till now, ASSU has now said, you know what, we have the same problem. The payments systems, they call it fraudulent. They say universities are still being underfunded, agreements are still not being reached. What's your opinion on all of this?
Thank you. Good morning, Nigerians. Happy weekend. My own take is in twofold. The truth, as I know it to be, is that government alone cannot fund education. And the resistance to introduce tuition in universities is counterproductive. Many people will say, oh, maybe he's an elite and he doesn't know what it takes to raise a child. I do. I have my own children. Many of us parents will send our children to private primary schools where they pay nothing less than 150,000 per term. That is just not the expensive one. And there are 3 terms in primary and secondary school. So on the average, you are spending 450,000 to train a child that is just barely 3 years or 5 years. When it gets to secondary school, you also want your child to go to private secondary school. But when it comes to university, you want a free education. The point is, we compare apple and oranges when we say, oh, in US, in UK. Do you know how much those in those climes pay for their education? But yesterday, it was in the papers that University of Lagos, which I am a proud alumni, that the light public electricity supply to University of Lagos was disconnected because the school was owing 1 billion naira to a electricity company. 1 billion. But ask if the VC introduced 100,000 levy per child, everybody will raise arms and say, no, we will not. Education is under social sector. It should be free. And we are deserving of free education. Who are we deceiving? Who are we deceiving? So until when I'm not saying government should not fund education better, but to expect government alone to fund education, that's the amount. I have people in public universities that are asked to pay their fees. In University of Ilorin, it's about 50-something thousand per session. That is not what you pay in a private primary school. Yet, many of us will not want our children to go to private public school, public primary school, public secondary school. We pay so much to get our children across. When it gets to the tertiary level, we are resisting any attempt. I mean, it was in the news. Is it University of Ibadan students that were resisting the introduction of tuition? And you cannot eat your cake and have it at the same time. Now, government needs, I'm not against that. But why government pays teachers living wage? Why they get them good environment, I've also said you can get the alumni to also do a lot. Uh, there are those who donate professorial chairs. There are companies that help and donate buildings to institutions. I have also suggested that we can have a PPP arrangement in order to expand the infrastructure in our universities. What do I mean? Many universities, if you go to University of Obafemi Awolowo University, the landmass of Obafemi Awolowo University is a town on its own, a whole town that they may not even expand the infrastructure to cover the entire land space that the university will. Why don't you use part of that land to offset a private developer to help you build additional lecture theaters, additional hostels, additional libraries, additional laboratories? So there are multiple funding mechanisms available to education sector, but to always believe that we can resist private funding, that parents will continue to insist that the school fees should not be increased, tuition should not be introduced, government should fund education because it's under the social chapter 2 of the constitution. Chapter 2 of the constitution is not justiciable. For our information, you cannot go to court to enforce it. It says government will provide free education when it can afford it. So we need to reorder our priorities. And I think that will solve a lot of problems. Yes, policy issue, autonomy issue, I agree we can do a lot more, fine-tune, implement. Even the 1.2 trillion that ASSU is asking for today, if the Tinubu administration manages to give that 1.2 trillion to ASSU, in another 3-5 years, if no additional funding is not coming in, you will find out that that money is insignificant because this 1.2 trillion was agreed in 2009. We know the value of our currency as at that time. The value of Nigeria naira as at 2009 was almost the exchange rate was maybe 30 naira to a dollar. Today, the exchange rate is 1,600 or thereabout to a dollar. So what you will do with 1.2 trillion 10 years, 15 years ago, you will not be able to do it in today's Nigeria. So we need multiple funding sources. I am all for improvement in the living wage of lecturers, non-academic staff, and I've said that individuals, alumni should also come in. They have been doing their bit. They can do more. But I think we need to look at the tuition and other levies that students pay. These are students who live in hostels. They want to use boiling. They want to use cooking electric stove to cook in their hostels, which is forbidden. But they smuggle these things in.
So while we try to get Mr. Jide back on, I do have some questions and feedback. Number one, you have spoken about tuition and how Nigerians complain about it. But
Provide
Nigerians, Mr. Jide, yes, it's good that we have you back. Nigerians would argue with some of the points you have made. So, for instance, a question you always get is, what has Nigeria done for me? Now, we are saying that the tuition is important because the university has bills to pay. But we have seen in Nigeria where it's alleged that the president has replaced his private jet because his presidential jet because this was necessary for him. We have seen within government institutions, in the financial sector and other places where you are hearing that they now have SUVs and they're spending billions of naira for themselves. We have also seen the fact that even though it's said that we pay the least, we've seen fuel subsidy removed, and now Nigeria is still paying even more for subsidy, while the average Nigerian is still suffering for it. finally, we've asked for minimum wage to be increased. At some point, the labor organizations and the NLC had asked for over 400,000 naira, which has still been brought down to below 100,000 naira. How then can we increase and ask for tuition in universities when, as opposed to increasing the minimum wage, we are renaming it and calling it a living wage? Governments across all different levels and tiers are still misappropriating funds. And so the average Nigerian will say, so what is the government doing for us? Because when it's priority to them, we've seen in the judiciary 300% rise in their wages. Isn't it fair that the government should, at this point where there's poverty, unemployment, and a poor economic situation, subsidize education a little more, or even pay the 1.2 trillion from 2009 to show that there is a handshake meeting in the middle? At what point do Nigerians stand to gain from this when they see government spending on other frivolities and things that may not be necessary? How would you address that
I, I,
argument?
I, I quite agree with you, my brother. Government need to do a lot more, and I've not been mincing words. Even in my write-up, I've always called out governments that they are not getting their priorities right. I'm one of the arch critic of Tinubu administration. I write for the Punch newspaper. You can go back and fact check me. Every week, I pick up government policies and programs and I dissect it and I apportion, blame and also offer recommendations. And I'm not saying that government is okay in terms of funding of education, but let's also get something right. In every climb, the elites, the ruling class always take look after their own interest. So I was vociferous against buying of private jets. I was vociferous against having 48 member cabinet minister. I was against the 160 million naira per unit SUVs that were purchased for the senators and House of Reps member last year. We have always called out these people, but I don't have the best I could do is media advocacy, which I'm doing right now. But I'm saying, why you wait? Sarah has used the instrumentality of public interest litigation. I hope you know Socioeconomic Rights Accountability Center in Lagos.
Yes.
Every weekend, by tomorrow, you see another press release from Sarah. Maybe it has dragged federal government to court on one issue or the other or another state government. That's their own forte. That's what they are set out to do, to use public interest litigation. But while you do all of that, I'm saying, let us look at the funding streams to the university. How do you, even with the 50% support that government said it will give to universities and hospitals, which Dr. Alausa said in the course of the week, to help them offset their energy cost. Assuming without considering that you now help University of Lagos to pay 500 million out of the 1 billion naira that is owing, how does it offset the remaining balance without having to levy the students? Who will pay the balance? Is it the lecturers that will contribute money on the out of their own purse to now pay? So we need to just look at appropriate pricing. Many of us have our children, all these 20-something thousand people that their certificates were invalidated in Cotonou and Togo, Benin and Togo. Do you think they pay peanuts? Do you think they pay 50,000 per session in those universities? Those who go to Sudan to study, those who go to Egypt, those who go to UK, Nigerians, I'm talking of Nigerians, I'm not talking of foreigners. So Nigerians that go abroad, as even those who go to Ghana, do their parents pay chicken money like 50,000, 100,000 to get them to go and school in those places? I've just given you statistics. You can fact check me. How
Mr.
much does parents pay for their children education in private primary school, private secondary school, that they now feel that they should have free education at the tertiary level?
Mr.
That's the
Jide,
big question.
Mr. Jide, I am a huge supporter of your objective writing which I read from time to time. And yes, you have always held government accountable. But when we have this conversation about people sending their children to the UK and other countries, it's a conversation from a position of privilege. We have 220 million Nigerians averagely. The number of Nigerian students who go abroad to study yearly, it's not more than a million. You still have about 219 million people to contend with. And so it's still a very small minority. However, you do make very valid points when it comes to funding. But to be able to get that, I'll need to know your response around university autonomy, which you have mentioned. Because in order for the PPPs to work, in order for private organizations to start funding, because in countries like the United States and the United Kingdom, the private sector plays a major role. You have some of these billionaires and business owners who create funds. And I think it should be done in Nigeria. The CBN has contributed massively to Nigerian federal and state universities, building departments and doing renovation, which is great. But to get this PPP and alternative funding, what are your thoughts on full autonomy for the universities? Because when they start generating funds, that's when Senate or FIRs will come and say, how far?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I agree with you, my brother. Unfortunately, you recall that last year there was even a memo that says that universities should start remitting part of their IGR to
Exactly.
the federal government, and the vice chancellors have to resist. I said, how much are we even generating with our IGR that you want us to be remitting part of it to you? And then Tinubu administration say, okay, you can have it. The point, I thank you for the compliments that you read me from time to time. So I'm not just coming on here to blow hot or because I'm a privilege. I went through the same university system. But if you want to deal with the rot, I'm very happy you came up with that PPP arrangement that works in other climes. I didn't even say I refrained from citing example of people going to UK, to Europe, to America. I'm talking of even those who go to Benin Republic, Togo, Niger Republic, Sudan, those who go to Ghana. They pay, I mean, equivalent of naira. They cannot pay anything short of 500 to 1 million naira for their education. But assuming that, yes, it is a privileged position, let's try different model. Let university have full autonomy. If university have full autonomy and they can engage private investors, University of Lagos is in a vantage position, has a lot of assets. In fact, did you know that as at the time I was in the university during Professor Jelili Omotola's vice chancellorship, they have already started Unilag Ventures, where they had the car wash, soap making factory. They were also having water. They were producing bottled water and sachet water just to earn additional income for the university. But and then you have those who can provide consultancy, Unilag consults that provide consultancy services for construction companies and all of that. And we need to have that more institutionalized. But I am all for accountability and transparency in the management of funds, because we have also seen university vice chancellors that have been dragged before EFCC and ICPC for mismanaging their school funds. The party funds that we say is not enough, we now have it being mismanaged. Then there is also another malaise that is afflicting our education industry. You see all the armed forces, their chief of staff, chief of army staff, chief of naval staff, chief of air staff, they are now struggling to establish additional universities for themselves. For whatever reason, they have now mushroomed so many universities without having resources for capital projects. So you have Army University in Buratai,
Yeah.
former chief of army staff Buratai sometime in Biu. You have chief of air staff, you have Air Force University in Kaduna. You have a Navy University somewhere. I learned customs also want to have its own university. Must be mushroom universities. According to Professor Osodeke, about 37 new universities have been licensed. So if you don't have funding, for existing one, why must you continue to establish fresh one? You can have the existing one to become multi-campus, in which case you now just have what do they call it? Is it affiliate or not
Satellite
affiliate?
campuses.
Of yes, different campuses, but that will have the same resources, human resources, training them in those so that you can increase the carrying capacity of the university, those who are seeking university admission. And of course, university education is not an end in itself. We also have to look at offshoot of that. When you graduate people from university, what happens next? How are we even training the future generation that will be marketable, that will be employable? Because many courses in the university needs to also be reviewed. I dare say, what will you do if you study classics, if you study anthropology, if you study, even political science, sociology? I studied political science, but I don't know. It may be out of frustration because I was at home for many years trying to gain admission. But we can't all be lawyers. The most important thing is also to look at, what is the market, what is trending, how do we streamline the curriculum on university to make our products to be employable after, whether it's 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, or whatever number of years they use. But funding is very key. We need to review that funding stream, funding architecture for universities. And I'm saying alumni are doing their own. Government is chipping in its own. It may not be enough. We can have the government doing a bit more in terms of funding. But don't forget that there is a lot of competition. The Medical and Dental Association and the Ministry of Health is also crying that they don't have full complement of what they needed to run our hospitals, from primary health centers to general hospitals, federal and state medical centers, and teaching hospitals. So so much is being demanded of government. But unfortunately, our political elites are more interested in their own luxurious lifestyle. They want to live large. They feel that it's a privilege for them to serve us, and so they cannot mortgage their own
Pleasure.
convenience.
I agree
But
with you
that
so
is how
much,
it works
Mr.
in many lives too.
I agree with you, Mr. Jide. Thank you so much for your contribution and your comments. Before I let you go, on a lighter note, you studied political science and you become a brilliant political analyst. I have a degree in sociology, which you mentioned, because I hear this conversation, and that was because the university gave it to me instead of giving me law, which I wanted then. But look at how you've turned out, look at how I've turned out, and so there's still hope for our Nigerian
Hope
students.
for the future, yeah.
Thank
But,
you
but
so
we
much.
will get back.
We will
Get
get
back.
there and
Thank you so
continue
much.
doing
I
what you
appreciate
do.
it.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Daniel, I'll let you give the final closing remarks in 1 minute.
All right, you see what he said a lot, but I still tell us, he pointed that the constitutional framework for the ASU's demand is not justifiable. They can't even go to court to demand for it. That means it's a fundamental problem, and it might continue tomorrow. So if the local government autonomy, for instance, had a smooth sail, I think that of ASU or the education sector, anything that makes Nigerian tertiary institutions, especially the public ones, to go on strike, should also be reenacted validly so that we don't have such occurrence. Then number two, he talked about parents and individuals they have to pay much for school. There are citizens demanding for free education. It's the government itself that imposes the various fees, tuition fees, in the government public tertiary institutions, and giving people paper certificate apart from medicine, maybe law, and part of engineering. The rest of the courses we have are paper certificates. How do you breed people out of the tertiary institutions to make them unemployed when they should have ordinarily used the time, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, even 8 years, to become productive in other facets of learning, as if you talk about self-entrepreneurship. Why do you waste their time? You owe the Nigerian student, I mean a graduate, a big apology if there is no providence of those things and you are still, molesting
So the
their right for studies.
constitution needs to work on, and the curriculum is something which must be adjusted. And also he mentioned autonomy, which
Yes.
I think you have agreed to, and
Yes.
funding. Unfortunately, because of time, Right Honorable Daniel, this is where we'll leave it. And to Mr. Jide, always a pleasure having a conversation with you. That's
you.
much we can take on the political segment. We'll take a quick break. When we return, we've still got entertainment for you, Entrepreneur Spotlight, and the Weekend Show is still on. Don't go away. See you.